Wow. Look at that buildup on the back of the stator. Holy crap. M18 is on the bench, and we're going to start pulling some shrouds off. See what this thing looks like underneath. I think we'll start on this side here. Okay, let's get that out of the way first. These are going to get replaced anyway, so probably just leave them off for now. They do have to come off to get the shroud off though, so. There we go. Yeah, it's going to be messy. There's nothing I can do about it. Yep. That's up out of the way now. So these originally were probably pretty nice. They've got swivel ends on both sides. But they use a mixture of different types of connections on it. Like there's a tube connection, and then NPT, and then back to tube, and then it's just. I originally thought they were JIC connections, but they're not. They got it looks like they have a 45-degree flare instead of a 37, so they're tube style. And I got. I'll show you while we're here. Got a stick of tube. Or 2 sticks to basically replace that and extend it further. These are labeled A and B at the filter, and they're labeled A and B down here, so if you get confused when you go to put it back together. They're labeled. I think it's spinning the whole fitting. Yeah, it is. Goes. So this shroud here was just sitting like this when I got it. It looks like we're missing a bolt there, here, and here. That whole shroud is only held on by a couple bolts. Pop this baby off, and I've had this shroud off once in the first video. Or one of the first videos. So I know kind of what it looks like back in here. But the engine was in the frame, so I had much less access to the back side of the shroud. So far, I think I've got 16, 17, almost 20 hours on the engine. Hasn't used much oil. It uses some. You can kind of smell it when it's cold. You can't see it, it doesn't smoke visibly, but you can smell it. But it does run well enough, it has good enough oil pressure that I think it's worth doing a service. I don't know if you would call this a 500-hour service or if you'd call this a 2,000-hour service. I really don't know how many hours are on this engine. If I'm going to guess, I'd say probably at least 1,500. Unless it's just been real poorly maintained. But it's a high-hour engine for sure. It's not a spring chicken. Yum. Like that. I got a leak right there. That head bolt, coming out of that head bolt. And back of the shroud looks pretty dry. I guess we'll just work our way like this. Slowly start taking things apart like that. Looks like that'll just pop off eventually. And that I don't know. There's a connection for the regulator up top here. Just slides right off, no big deal. The bottom of the shroud. Oh boy. So now we're down in here. I'm gonna pop that guy out. And then come over here. And it looks like there's one down in there. A couple over here. And a couple across the top. Ooh, it's already loosened up quite a bit. So far, these all look about the same size. So, start putting them in a bin. Oh boy. So I don't know how much of this I'm going to have to pull off, but it looks like if I take the screws, or I'll take the bolts out of the opposite side, this side cover, it'll come apart. Oh yeah, that's real close to coming off of there. So, you've got some connections at the top here. There's one there. It holds this baffle in. And then the side covers here and there. And then there's one underneath down here, and the same on the opposite side and down there. That's pretty much ready to go. We got two that bolt to the head. This engine has been apart at least once before. Okay. This is the cover from the other side. It's not quite as bad. Banged up and rattle canned and gross, but it doesn't have the oil buildup. So there's a baffle that goes around the fuel pump over here. And looks like the best bet is to take off that baffle. Ooh, that one might not have come off before. Or if it has, it's been a while. That was the first bolt that was actually tight. Oh boy. It's the baffle for the fuel pump. Now what? Let's see. To pop out the wiring for the spark plugs and the charging circuit, but still, yeah, I think I'm hitting the back of the flywheel. There's a secondary plate that runs across the top of the shroud, and it looks like, yeah, that's it. So that's got to come off. Oh, here it comes. Yay. It is gross. It's pretty nasty. Oh wow, that head is just packed full of stuff. And that jug is. One is not too bad, the other one's pretty stinking bad. Whew. And here's the parts we just pulled off. The two side tins, the rear shroud, oil filter housing and lines, and then the fuel pump baffle. Here's what we got. This side, the jug and the head on this side is really caked and stuff. It's pretty bad. Actually, this whole back of this motor is pretty wet. Back in here, it's actually underneath the fuel pump. It's not just like build up residue, it's actually wet back there. It's wet all the way down along here. I'm probably going to end up pulling the flywheel, as gross as this looks. See what's going on behind there. Yeah, she was long overdue for a service like this. We can get down in the... Yeah, look back in there, dude. It's just covered in grease. So what we saw on the frame, all that grossness there, it's been coming from this at some point in time. It just plops off of there. Oh boy. Not too bad, it's a little wet. So if you look at the way the head was sitting right here, it'd be this bolt here. That's where it was leaking. Smells like fuel, not like oil. Not too bad. Oh. Yeah. They definitely got a little bit of play in the piston. Not a bunch of oil buildup, doesn't look terrible. But the piston itself, you can rock it up and down in the bore a little bit. So that's this side. And let's pull the bolts out and then we'll look at, I think all the bolts are all the same length, maybe. Looks like this cylinder is in about the same condition that the cylinder in the 1250 is in. Not terrible, but not great. Yeah, if you look at the head, you can see it's a little wet in there. But that's fuel. That's just from the latest cranking on it. It's not super clean, but it's not terrible. And the plug itself, really not too bad, all things considered for a flathead. Looks pretty clean. There's definitely some carbon and or oil chunks coming off in there, but I ran a bunch of Marvel through it, so that's probably a result of the Marvel starting to work that stuff out. Yeah, doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's definitely not perfect, but not terrible. Let's do the other side. So that was the oily side. That was the really oily side. That really hasn't gotten much lighter at all. Man, this starter wire has just gotta go. I am tired of fighting it. Whoa. Yeah, I'm gonna have to be careful with that. Whoo! You're gonna, yeah. Let's probably see this. That wire is toast, dude. It's gotten really hot. And it is about to go. And the post is in terrible shape too. So let's do the right thing and give it a fighting chance of coming off there and not snapping the stud off the starter. So this is the cylinder head side that's a little drier. This is starter side. I'm sure the heads are warped. Anyways. Well, it wants to come off of there. It just wants to fall off. This one's a little wetter. Not terrible. We got the same wear on the cylinders. I don't see a stamping on the block anywhere where it's been bored over. It might still be standard bore. Let's rotate the piston around. There we go. There's TDC right there. It's definitely burning some oil. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's down on the bottom of the cylinder here. It's definitely burning some oil. Oh, look at that. There's a section of the gasket that's not good there. And what do you know? It lines up with... Yep. So this was the hole that was blown out. One of the first videos I did, when we looked at it just to get the engine going, you can see how oblong that hole is. That was where the bolt was sticking out and just hitting the shroud. So this bolt here is this same hole here, and that's where the gasket had just kind of flopped around in there. And yeah, and if you look at this side of the head, you can see how dark this is here, where it was leaking some of the compression right out of that side. In general, it doesn't look too bad. Not great. It's definitely a high-hour engine. And the piston definitely has some movement in the bore. Hear it? Wow, look at that. Yep, it's completely shot right there. I'll get a wire wheel. We'll clean this off here now that everything's at TDC. Pretty sure. Oh, there's the valve overlap. That's compression. Okay. So we'll clean the piston and the cylinder off a little bit. See if we can see any markings on here to indicate whether it's been oversized or not. A lot of this is just, like I was saying before, for peace of mind, knowing what we've got and what we don't. It's curiosity as much as it is anything else. So the piston's aluminum. I'm going to be a little bit more careful with it. That's not too bad. That feels like a light carbon. That's not real bad. Definitely burning some oil down the bottom here. That's not too bad though. Oh, there's a mark down there. See something. Oh, there's the arrow. So that says towards the flywheel. These pistons have a direction they sit in the bore. Yeah, that buildup wasn't really that bad. Probably helped that I ran some marble through it before opening it up. There we go, that's what we were looking for. This is an original bore, piston. And we just confirm that. That STD is for standard bore. Direction of installation, that says fly, so towards flywheel, I assume. So we got a standard bore. Whether or not that means that's the original piston, I'm not sure, but high hour standard bore engine, at least on this side. We'll see what we find on the other side. Okay, let's clean up this side, see what we get over here. Okay, there we go. That's good enough to see what we're working with. It's not good enough for reassembly, but it's good enough for checking it out. Oh wow, you can actually... Yeah, see that? That's definitely not the quietest. Uh-oh, what do we got here? Oh, that's standard too. Okay. Almost looked like it had a 10th thou in there. She's still got some life in her. Definitely not perfect, but it'll run until I find one that I can rebuild. Okay, let's wipe it down. Let's see if we can get this one cleaner. So we've got some pretty hard carbon buildup right here. And it looks like, oh, they have bigger exhaust valves on it. Huh. That's cool. The exhaust valve actually looks not the same as the intake. So we have a standard bore, flywheel side, and then a part number. I can't tell what it says. So it looks like we've got an engine that is internally stock, most likely. High hour, not so great maintenance, stock M18. So now that we've got an idea of what's going on out here, I'm going to temporarily just put the heads back on to keep the cylinder covered up while I do the rest of the work. And then as part of final assembly, we'll resurface the heads and put new head gaskets on. Just wanted an idea, just like viewing, you know, with the rear shroud off, or the front shroud off, get an idea of what things look like. Same thing with the heads and the cylinders. Actually, we can, if I get some compressed air over here, we can take a look at the bores too. I didn't even look at the bore yet. See what we got. Ooh. Can still see a crosshatch. We got some pretty good scuffing going on. Boy. So this is the cylinder for the real greasy side. See some crosshatch in some areas, like right here. You can see some, but there's a lot of uneven wear. No major gouging. Some scuffing on the walls right there from the piston. It's like aluminum scuffing up in that area right there. And you can kind of see, you can see the gap between the cylinder and the piston. That's not quite round and not quite the right size anymore. So here's the bore for the opposite side. This side's not quite so caked in oil. Probably hasn't run as hot as the other side, although there's quite a bit down here, but the fins on the jug itself are not as caked. And pretty similar situation here. And that crosshatch continues up the bore a little bit further. We still have some scuffing over here at the top of the bore. Yeah, you can see that scuffing right there. And the piston itself is pretty worn near the exhaust valve. Pretty standard. You can see it there. You can really tell where it's been worn. I see the gap there. All around there is pretty. There's more of a gap there than there is anywhere else. She's worn out, but we'll keep moving along and see what else we find. Okay, the heads are back on temporarily. Just cleaned up the gasket by hand, cleaned up the heads and the face of the block, and then just put 2 bolts in the heads just to hold them in there to make sure nothing gets into the cylinders while we do the rest of this stuff. Now we're going to pull the flywheel to get behind here, check the stator, and clean up everything behind the flywheel, because everything, all this grease here, it's basically the whole back of the engine's like that. So okay, here comes the fun part. Let me take off the magneto first. Yeah, these are threaded here. I can get a puller on it. That's plastic, so I don't want to bang on that. Yeah, we'll just get a puller on it. There we go. Okay. Yeah, that'll work. Using a tiny screw as an adapter to go on the end of the rod here so I don't damage the threads. I guess I could put the bolt in there if I wanted to. Yeah, let's do that. Just to make sure we don't damage the lead-in on threads either. I guess if that's the case, we could use the flat adapter, which is... So I'm going to put the bolt into the crankshaft and then use this flat adapter, push it into the center of the bolt. Now I'm not going to run it 100% in, just to make sure the crankshaft doesn't get damaged. I think it'll work. Here we go. That's it. Beats banging on it. Whoa. gross. Here's the flywheel. This thing probably weighs 25 pounds. So this in a nutshell shows why I pulled the engine. There's the greasy jug over there. The less greasy one there. Over there is the fuel pump. Not clean, but it's the buildup over there is less than it is everywhere else. It's because it's real wet right there. It just keeps washing down. And I think all of the oil on this side is coming out of this breather plate here. Behind there, you just got tons of crap. I'll build up around the stator. So while everything is still pretty much sealed up, we'll go ahead and clean this off. And I'll probably pull the stator first and see what we look like there. Rear main or front main here. Looks a little wet there. We might end up replacing that too. Okay, the last two things that I'm going to pull off before I start cleaning this janky starter and the stator. At that point, everything's still decently well sealed up and I can hit it with a pressure washer. So yeah, let's get the starter off first. I'm going to leave the cable connected because it's going to be easier to get the cable off when it's on the bench. It's in bad shape and I don't want to break the stud on the starter, so. Oh, there it goes. This is kind of the reason that I put the engine on some blocks of wood, because I knew that some of this stuff was going to be real close to the bench. I wanted to give myself a little bit of wiggle room here. Oh, there's two different kinds of nuts that came off of that. On the bottom I have a flange. On the top I just had a regular nut with a lock washer. So, who knows? There's that janky connection for the starter. We'll put that on the bench and service that. Looks like the starter's been replaced. That's not a factory. It looks newer than the rest of the engine. Okay, let's pull the stator now. Surprising that the charging system worked at all. This thing is just caked. Boy. Definitely a little wet right there. Oh, you can see the split in the cases. Right here is the seam between the two case halves. It's not a perfectly lined up surface. Okay, and then the wiring for the stator comes out here. And it's connected to, looks like it's connected to this whole harness here. That's the sending wire for the low oil pressure light. So on the magneto, there's a wire here. There's the kill wire. So to get this off as an assembly, you got to pop this kill wire off. Comes through this grommet. And then this harness here comes out like that. And now the magneto is separate from the stator harness. So here's the whole stator harness here. You've got this plug and this plug. Wow. Look at that buildup on the back of the stator. Holy crap. It's about as far as we can get. Now we've got access to everything in here. So we can clean from the front here and then clean from the back on the other side. And it's considerably lighter now too, which is nice. We'll do some work degreasing it, getting 30 years of cruft off of it. 90, yeah, it's 2020, so that's 30 years of oil and grass. Yeah, after we get it cleaned up, then we'll start actually working on resealing it and putting new head gaskets on. We're also going to pull off the PTO, this bearing. Pretty crappy, so let's go ahead and get that off of there. Oh, nice. Someone's had a good time with that. Yeah, someone's had fun with that. Okay. Big groove all the way around here. Wow. He's not happy. This is the bad bearing here. Looks like this is bent. I don't know why that's bent, but it is. I don't know if I want to take the whole thing off. I probably should. The one place I know somebody's been on this engine is this closure plate in the front here. There's some non-factory sealant in between the two surfaces that I can see. So I was hoping to avoid taking the whole thing off because I don't want to take the muffler off. It makes it kind of easy to move around. I can grab the muffler, but I might just take it off, take the whole thing out of there. I had these off before, so they're not as bad. But I think the muffler's got to come off in order for the PTO plate to come off. It looks like it. Here we go. There's one new bolt for muffler clamp. Here's the other muffler clamp. Yeah, I kind of knew it was going to be a pain. There. No more muffler. Now we can get these bolts here out, and then down here, and then the whole thing will come off. Oh yeah, be fun? Yeah, you're gonna be fun, aren't you? Yep, it's gonna be fun. Should just slide off there, but it's not. Let's give her a little bit of lube. Whoa! That's the whole crank moving. Hmm. Hmm. I don't really want to use a puller on it. Wow. It's coming. It's just real slow. I'm not hammering very hard at all. I'm barely tapping it. So. Whew! Man. That hasn't been off there in a while. Oh, wow. Well. You can see why it was hard. There's a bunch of rust in there. I think this engine sat out for quite a while. Yeah, look at the rust on the shaft. Jeez. Oof. Coil's seen better days too. Alright, here we are, ready to start cleaning. This is where the crappy work really starts. So I got them degreasing now, and we're going to hit each one with the pressure washer and hopefully make them somewhat presentable again. Here's the stator. I got a huge chunk of stuff just falling off of there. It's nice. PTO, not too greasy, not too bad, just needs clean. Starter's pretty gross. The flywheel actually has loose magnets on it. This one, and that one are all loose. When you look, you can see how you've got a gap, an even gap there, and there, and then look at that gap. So these are shifted and all shoved their way that way. So those will have to be glued after everything's cleaned. The tins are just the tins. They're gross and bent up. Not a big deal. And I brought the engine plate over too. That's not too bad. Get the rest by hand. It's a little better than I did before. Somebody rattle canned it real nice right here. Probably just going to spray paint these black. And then in here we got what I think are non-factory holes, where they tried to pull the muffler tin into the engine tins. Looks a little bit better. And again, someone did a nice rattle can job, where they oversprayed onto the tins. I think they were spraying the frame and they sprayed the tins. Looks like this actually has a model number or a serial number on it. There's the stator. You can actually see the poles on it now. Crazy. Still needs cleaned up a little bit. Starter. Oops. Not too bad. A little bit better. PTO pulley. There's the clutch. shroud coil for the PTO. This is that top plate that goes across the top of the shroud. I'll bring the air out here and blow everything off. Okay, so we got most of the stuff off of everything. Tried to be pretty careful with the electronics, like the PTO coil, the stator, and the magneto. Those I'm gonna have to do more by hand. The shrouds turned out okay. Still a little bit of work to do there, but nothing too terrible. This is how she sits. All the accessories off of it. Got a plastic bag zip tied over those so I don't get water down into the oil galleys. So let's see if we can polish this turd. So this is not a show engine, but it should be clean enough to run pretty cool now. You can see all the way through the fins. There's not a bunch of debris stuck in between here and here. This was completely coated on this side. And back around the flywheel, it's pretty clean. This cylinder looks pretty good too. Fins are nice and clean. You can actually see the jugs now. Top looks about the same. Here's the PTO side. Again, got air should move pretty freely through there. And the same over here. I feel a lot better running it like that. You can see the PTO shaft, why that PTO was so hard to come off of there. There's a bunch of rust right there. Probably hasn't come off in a while. So we'll pull it back inside and get to work.